Hello, and welcome to Holy Potatoes, a Spy Story. It's another one of the lovely Holy Potatoes games made by the people at Daylight Studios over in Singapore, I believe. And this one's a bit different from the others because it takes more of the sort of almost board game style board management aspects into it, like I've seen some management games do on PC recently, and it kind of runs with that. So if you don't know, the Holy Potatoes games are a series of various sort of self-parodying, often management games in various aspects that have this whole universe of sentient vegetables called edibles that are usually based on like popular figures, video game characters, all sorts of things like that. And the games don't take themselves seriously at all and are often a little bit self-referential, but not to the point where it's like constantly joking about the fact that it's a video game to an annoying degree. And usually are really quite a lot of fun for sort of light management games. They tend to veer towards the lighter end of the management game spectrum. You're not going to be playing like RimWorld or Dwarf Fortress here. That's not what you're looking at. But they are complex and interesting enough to actually hold your attention, generally speaking, and they get pretty fun, and also quite difficult later on. And A Spy Story, as you can probably tell by the name, is all about managing a spy agency, an agency of spy potatoes that go on various missions to, well, do just about anything for a client, depending on who it actually is. And it is your task to actually keep the agency running smoothly and keep everyone happy. Now, this game does a fairly interesting and very useful thing in terms of the management gaming genre, in that it doesn't start you out with all of the sort of character mechanics unlocked at first. You have all sorts of things like happiness level for your spies and what sort of mental state they're in, what they like to do, if they prefer a stressful activity or if they prefer fun activities. All of that sort of stuff is very important later on, but it doesn't start that way, because I think that would be maybe a bit overwhelming at first to have to manage all of that at once from the start, and it slowly eases you into things as the game goes on very well. Basically what you have is a board-style board that, that was a bad sentence, that actually expands as you go on in the game, and you can build all sorts of different things across the whole board, from the very important facilities that are always there, like the agency itself, the barracks for your spies, and the actual mission control center, to things like gene splicing locations and labs for developing new equipment for your spies, because of course spies have to have gadgets, right? And even training facilities of various aspects that affect how your spies will develop. Every spy has 4 separate stats, you could say, that depend on what their class is and will actually determine what they can do and what sort of missions they're going to be available, or well, at least good at. And you start with 4 classes, but with the gene modification system that comes in the sort of 3rd chapter of the game, you can do even more with that, and there are actually a lot more classes with more abilities to unlock once you get that, which is pretty cool, actually. I didn't expect that. There's a whole tree of them you'll see a little bit later. These stats are things like sneaking, sort of sneaking skill, fighting skills, as well as a skill for charming and one for sort of ingenuity. And every spy has all 4 of those values, but the individual classes tend to focus on one of those in particular, the 4 starting classes. And they also have 2 abilities that they can unlock that generally increase the effectiveness of those stats for a limited time once they get to a certain level, and you level them up by taking them on missions, of course. And you can later on, of course, as I mentioned, get those unlockable classes that will specialize in multiple different variations of these stats and have different sort of requirements for what they need, and of course have their own special active abilities that they can bring to a mission. And the way missions work is, as you saw there, you select a mission that you want to take on, and it will have a sort of grid that you can see, and this grid will be effectively what they have to go through before getting to the goal. And this is the gene splicing aspect of it, which is pretty cool, actually. And this grid is mostly covered up. Most of the squares on it are not unlocked for you to see, and if there is a square with a encounter in it, like a guard or a passerby they have to get through like unsuspiciously, then you won't know what to do with them, because you can click on the individual encounters and it will tell you what of the various stats, of the 4 stats, is best used on them. because depending on their type. Like, for instance, a vintage camera is best dealt with by fighting because it's old and easy to break. But a puppy, for instance, is a passerby that you can charm because it's a puppy. So you need to actually take into account what is on the board and what kind of encounters that your spy is going to go through to determine which of your spies you want to use. Because if there's a lot of fighting in a mission, then obviously you're going to need to use a spy that's really good at fighting, or else you're going to screw it up. And the missions go on in the bottom left after you actually dispatch them, and in that time you can also manage your base. Things like training up various spies, or building new things, or doing whatever. You can only do one mission at a time, but everything else you can do in the meantime as well. There are also these, which are specific types of very story-based missions that have a much more active element to them. Instead of going on in the bottom left corner, they are a full-screen activity, and you choose a spy for each of the 4 stats, basically the ones that you feel have the best for the job, and also a selection of their skills, up to 4 skills that you can bring with you, and you effectively sort of play as the leader of the agency in these missions, backed by those spies, in order to get past a heavily story-based mission that will have all sorts of various encounters. And the way that the encounters work is sort of like a 4-way rock, paper, scissors system, in that you need to choose which of the 4 stats based attack you want to use, and it will either say nothing, will say that it is incredibly effective, or that it was weakened versus the opponent you're fighting, and you need to be switching through these to find the one that the guards or whatever it is you're fighting are weakest against, so that you can most efficiently take them out without losing very much health. And those 4 abilities, which do a certain thing when they're used by the spy themselves in a solo mission, do something a little bit different here in the big sort of 4-person story missions. There aren't a tremendous number of these missions, and they don't last for too long. I think they don't overstay their welcome. They're an interesting diversion from the way that normally works, but they also don't take a huge amount of time away from the main game in terms of the management aspect. So they're an important part of progressing, generally speaking, like a capstone on a chapter, which is, I feel personally, a very good way to use them. You also, of course, as I mentioned earlier, have gadgets and even vehicles, because, as I mentioned, everything happens at the same time. Time is very much a factor. As it is with a lot of management games, managing time is just as important as managing the actual characters, because if you don't have enough time to do things, you might fall behind, have to pay a bunch of money in like reparations for failing a mission, all sorts of things like that. So you need to manage your time as well, and that's what vehicles are for the most part. They get you to and from the actual mission area that you chose more quickly. And there are land, sea, and air vehicles, because there are mission boards that are all 3 of those things. So some of the routes you can unlock have to be taken on only with specific land, sea, or air vehicles, or else you can't bring one. And also vehicles tend to let you bring more gadgets with you by virtue of being able to stash them in the vehicle until you get there, effectively. And gadgets are things that have a percentage chance of going off every time an encounter happens in the bottom left of the screen, and they will enhance, just by being on the mission, various statistics of the spy using them. They can also do things like increase the EXP gain at the end of a mission, or even give you more money at the end of a mission. And gadgets come in quite a wide variety, and they can be individually upgraded with a separate resource, as can vehicles, and you can also research more of them by getting these little cartridges or discs from completing missions and then decrypting those with a spy, or just by upgrading the individual buildings that you go to build the gadgets and vehicles themselves. So there's a lot to unlock and see, and gadgets also have a durability system where it goes from very high to very low, and it's decreased by 1 step every time you take them on a mission. And it's sort of like a random check whether or not it will break after that mission is done. And at very high, there's still technically a chance that it could break. It's just very low of a chance. But once it get down to, say, like the mid durability, it's got a pretty good chance of breaking when you bring it on a mission, and you're going to have to build more gadgets because they don't last forever. You also have a lovely, adorable pet, just like all the other Holy Potatoes games. In this case, it is a sort of weird flying gerbil hamster thing that you can actually give gadgets to, and it will occasionally find special stuff like money or blueprints and all kinds of things just by being idle with this gadget for a while, but it can break the gadget as well. And I named mine Hamtato. Thank you very much. And also, you can even name your spy agency, as is classic for the Holy Potatoes games. You can generally name just about every aspect of what the game is about. And I named mine Potate, because, well, don't ask me what it stands for, because I haven't backnamed that yet, but I'm working on it. And the building aspect is also very important, because, as I mentioned, you have this grid of squares that you can place all the various buildings and things down on, and as you go through the game, you'll get to new areas, move to new cities, and that will expand out the grid, allowing you to build further things. You can build paths, decorations, which will improve the efficiency of any buildings that are near them, and the buildings themselves, from the places to train, are an interesting thing to talk about, because they vary a lot in how they work. When you use a training space, you have to pay a certain amount of money, and a spy will go in there for a while and be unavailable to do other things, although you can end the training at any time if you really need them, but you will not be refunded, of course, for doing that. And it will raise or lower their stats. It tells you exactly what it does on the description of the training center, but some of them do things like increasing one stat a whole bunch, or increasing a bunch of stats a little bit, or even increasing a couple of stats a good amount, but decreasing one other one. There's just a large variety in the various things they can do, and you of course have to decide which of the inherent qualities in a spy makes them best for which station to use, since they take a while and they end up taking a lot of money to use if you do it a lot. Like, for instance, some of the later ones take like $1,000 a pop and up to use, and several, like a day or two worth of time. So that's a very important aspect of management, because if you don't do that, then they're probably not going to be well enough geared out and equipped and developed to actually do harder missions. You can do some easier missions via the sort of side quest panel that I've been doing here, and those help you develop less leveled potatoes, because the levels are separate from their stats, of course. They gain all stats when they level up. And it's all just sort of a big juggling act of managing these various situations and trying to keep everything afloat the best you can, and I find that really, really entertaining, because again, it's very much like a board game style of management system, and I like seeing that style actually translated well into a video game, and it's not always done that well. Things like Anti-Hero, for instance, did it really well as well. Aside from that, that is mostly what the game consists of. It is a very competent, very enjoyable, light management game focused on managing an agency of vegetable spies, and that's pretty cool, because I don't know any other game that does exactly that. It's got a really good sense of humor, it's drawn very well, the art style is pretty great, it's very consistent with their other Holy Potatoes games, and, well, I should say it's got a very good sense of humor maybe for some people, because the puns are really bad, but they're bad on purpose. They're deliberately cheesy, horrible puns for everything, all the time, and I like that. That's just my kind of thing, I guess. So that is Holy Potatoes, A Spy Story, a very entertaining light management game that very successfully brings that sort of board game management experience to PC with this cool system they've got. And I'm always looking forward to see what these guys do next. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm hoping maybe, you know, we've been to space, we've owned a weapon shop, we've been in hell, and now we've been spies. So maybe like some sort of time-traveling shenanigans with like robo-spuds and dinotators, or something like that. Maybe I would like to see, honestly, some sort of like full-grown, almost tactical, like SRPG kind of game, with the various classes being locked to various races of edibles. I think that would be really entertaining, but that would take a lot of time to make, and probably a lot of money. Anyway, that's a good overview of the game, and I think that it's something that will appeal to a lot of people that really enjoy management games. And as with a lot of their previous games, it's deep enough to get lost in for any amount of time that you want, while, you know, having this management experience that you enjoy, with all these various mechanics that come together to form something pretty interesting. But it's also not so complex that if you don't play it for a while, or if you want to just jump in it for a little bit, you don't completely just lose the boat and screw up everything. You know, it's something that you can equally play all night, or just hop onto for an hour, feel like you got a little bit of progress, hop off of, and then do it again tomorrow. So I think that's a really good aspect of the light management genre, this sort of sim that's going on right now, and I'd like to see more of them. More of this sort of thing is enjoyable, because it's a really good middle ground between the sort of really simple sims and the very complex management sims that take a long time to get into. And all of those are good, but I would like to see more of games like this, more of the Holy Potatoes games, effectively, that they're making, that have that sort of lighter element while still being complex enough to keep my interest. This game will be available either today or tomorrow, depending on when this video goes out. Basically, it'll be available the 7th of November for $15, so a very fair price for what's on offer, as is usual for those guys. And that's that, I suppose. Thank you guys very much for watching, and enjoy your spying. I'll see you next time.